Coronavirus pandemic is a critical emergency on a national scale. The COVID-19 virus has infected over 13 million people and killed more than 270,000 in the United States. The supply of cloth face masks provided by the government to public schools has been eliminated, and schools, already faced with reduced budgets, cannot afford to provide personal protective equipment to students and staff. Without PPE, students and staff are susceptible to coronavirus. Due to the potential contagion of coronavirus, H.R. 8307 Masks for Students Act of 2020 should be passed. First, I will discuss the problems related to funding of supplies for public schools. Next, I will explain what might be causing schools to lack operational safety funds. Finally, I will deliver solutions to the funding problem. In order to better understand why I'm advocating for this policy, we need to understand some of the problems related to funding for PPE supplies in public schools. According to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention in 2020, the CDC established guidelines for schools to reduce the spread of coronavirus during in-class learning, which stated that students, teachers, and staff follow all steps to protect themselves and others at all times, including proper use of face masks, social distancing, hand hygiene. Funding of PPE and classroom safety items was not provided by the state budgets. According to Marketplace in November 2020, most K-12 public schools in this country are funded based on daily enrollment and attendance figures. According to Wall Street Journal on August 2020, schools in Indiana, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Georgia, and Nebraska closed to in-person learning this month after students and staffers tested positive for COVID-19, with students moving to online learning. One example of this is cited in the Wall Street Journal on August 2020. Darren Arlt, superintendent of Plainview Public Schools in Nebraska, tested positive for COVID-19 on August 12th, the day before school was to start. 6 teachers and 2 administrators were deemed to be close contacts and therefore required to quarantine for 14 days. Said Dr. Arlt, "We plan to mandate masks for staff and are still considering the same for students. With the students attending class online, how do schools get the funds they need to meet CDC safety guidelines?" Now that we have looked at the problem facing schools during the COVID-19, let us look at what might be causing schools to lack operational safety funds. One main cause of this problem is the previous funding sources are no longer able to provide money for PPE in the schools. In September 2020, according to NPR, FEMA had previously provided funding for personal protective equipment in public schools. However, when the fall semester of 2020 began, FEMA stopped providing supplies like cloth face masks. Keith Turry, FEMA Assistant Administrator for Recovery, explains cloth face masks and personal protective equipment in non-emergency settings will be classified as increased operating costs for public school services and will not be covered by the fund. A previous source of funding was the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. This act provided $16.2 billion to public schools to help during the pandemic, but it was not enough to make up for the state budget cuts. According to Learning Policy Institute, CARES education funding is equivalent to only 1.9% of P-12 education revenue in the 50 states and Washington, D.C. in the 2020 to 21 school year, which is on average equal to $286 per student. In May 2020, the House of Representatives passed a second CARES Act, providing additional funds to schools, but it was never passed by the Senate. Without adequate funding, public schools cannot purchase the supplies to protect students, teachers, and school personnel. Now that we have looked at some of the causes of the lack of funding for PPE in schools, let us look at the possible solutions. Some parents and students are opposed to wearing masks, even if the school provided them. For example, some believe that wearing a mask will not stop the spread of coronavirus. The latest research, however, actually states that masks can protect you from other people. The coronavirus is airborne and can spread from an infected person to others by coughing and sneezing. According to the Journal of Family Medicine and Primary Care in June 2020, when a face mask is worn, one can prevent those droplets from coming into contact with one's face or mouth before dropping to the ground. Some argue that mandates on wearing masks are an infringement on their personal and constitutional rights. For example, according to WTOC 11 in July 2020, Daniel McCarthy, Scottsdale, Arizona's city councilman, declares that masks are a violation against our First Amendment rights, our Fifth Amendment rights. In that same news report, Attorney Joe Steffen states that there is nothing in the Constitution that says the government gives up their right to protect the health and safety of the public. In fact, he said, that's the role of the government. Steffen cited Jacobson versus Massachusetts, where the Supreme Court supported Massachusetts' smallpox vaccination requirement. Masks are an essential part of PPE, provide safety to students and school staff. Therefore, I am advocating to pass H.R. 8307 Masks for Students Act of 2020. This bill will require FEMA to continue providing funding for cloth face masks and PPE in support of safe in-class learning. The biggest issue facing schools is safety of students and staff. CDC establishes guidelines that promote the use of cloth face masks and social distancing, which enables students to learn in a safer environment. According to the 116th Congress, the bill provides cloth facial coverings in public schools, kindergarten through 12th grade, that provide in-person learning. I believe this will significantly raise the levels of safety for students in public schools. Please contact House Representative Nancy Pelosi at 415-556-4862 to give your support. I have presented that public schools have funding problems, especially for personal protective equipment and safety supplies. Then, I discussed why schools lack funding for safety equipment. In the final section, I proposed a solution to provide public schools with funding for masks. I want to go back to USF, and so do many others. If we are going to reopen school, we have to do it safely. That means wearing a mask, washing your hands, keeping 6 feet apart, but most importantly, keeping in mind the safety of ourselves and others in the community. Masks do not provide 100% safety, but they do reduce the number of infections and deaths caused by the coronavirus. They are the best we can use to protect ourselves and others and go back to school safely. Wear your mask.